Today, we're covering a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is the Game Boy lineup. So, I got a DMG, must have been when I was 5 years old, and I actually lost that original gray one, and I got this one as a replacement before Pokemon came out. And I had played Quicks and Power Rangers, and I believe this one came with Link's Awakening when I got it. Then, the Christmas that Pokemon came out, I got this Atomic Purple Game Boy Color. I skipped right over the pocket. I never had a pocket, so when I got into modding and putting IPS screens in these that you can see back there, one of the first ones I imported was a Game Boy Pocket from Japan. It had a bad screen in it, so I put an IPS and I put it in a kind of extreme rate wood themed shell. And I really liked the form factor of the Pocket. It just felt good in your hands. It was nice and compact. But I had spent so much time as a kid playing on the Game Boy Color that I got used to playing games like Pokemon Blue with the blue palette and Donkey Kong 94 with the kind of red palette that the Game Boy Color gave a lot of the original Game Boy games. And I also still wanted to play the Game Boy Color exclusives like Oracle of Ages and Seasons, Wario Land 3, but I still wanted that form factor. And then I modified that DMG, and it had custom color palettes, which was really cool. I made a custom palette that matched the blue for Pokemon. I made a custom palette that matched the red for Donkey Kong. But once again, I still couldn't play Game Boy Color games. So, that's where today's mod comes in. And the star of today's mod is this mod board from N64-Freak. Now, he made a post on Reddit where he showed off this board, and what it is, you take all the components off of a Game Boy Color and transplant it onto that board that fits inside a Game Boy Pocket shell without having to cut the board in half or use the daughter board like some of the mods. And you don't lose the headphone jack, you don't lose the DC jack, which we are going to lose because we're going to put a USB-C mod. The original Game Boy Pocket ran on AAAs, and an IPS screen and Game Boy Color CPU and the Game Boy Color cartridges are going to suck down those AAAs in no time. So we're going to put a lithium battery in it. For this mod, we're doing a DMG gray color shell with the DMG color buttons, the red buttons and the black D-pad, kind of as an homage to that first DMG that I lost. And then we've got the form factor in a pocket with the functionality of a color. So let's get into what we need for this. Alright, so first we've got our DMG gray Game Boy Pocket shell, our DMG buttons that are for a pocket, a funny playing IPS kit, this is the V1.5, a glass screen lens, it's kind of the lighter gray, this is also from Funny Playing, for a Game Boy Pocket. And then we've got a set of membranes for our buttons. We've got our USB-C charging board, and we've got a female USB-C port with a breakout board. So got our LiPo battery. We will be salvaging components from our donor Game Boy, but we do need to put in 3 of these new electrolytic capacitors. And then we've got this huge order from Mouser. Now, I ordered it from Mouser. You can get it from any electronic supply chain or store. The bill of materials that you're going to need to buy is on N64-Freaks Github page. I'll leave a link to that down below. Alright, so when you're using one of these Funny Playing kits, or really any aftermarket IPS kit, the manufacturer always tells you to test it before you install it. So we're going to do that first before we do anything else. To disassemble this Game Boy, we just remove the 6 tri-wing screws in the back shell, pull the back cover off, and then there's 3 Phillips heads. We're going to take this ribbon cable loose and then pull it out. Now that our board is free, we need to slot this ribbon cable in and then lock down the connector. Now we're going to pre-tin this pad labeled power on the ribbon cable, and we're going to add a little bit of solder to the leg labeled C on the power switch. Take the shortest wire in the kit and solder one side to the pad labeled power and the other side to the C leg of the power switch. Now we're going to take the back and put it onto the motherboard. Make sure to line up the battery terminals. Pop two AA's in. Flip the switch to the on position. It turns on and there's no damage to the screen. Alright, now that we've tested our board with the screen, we're going to remove all the through-hole components like the cartridge slot, the power regulator, because I think that's going to give us more room to work with the surface mount stuff and the hot air rework station later. I used a couple different methods for removing these components. On these smaller pins, I used a desoldering gun after adding some fresh solder to kind of make it easier to melt. For the larger pins, I used a low melting point solder, and what that does is give you a few more seconds to remove the component because the solder stays liquid long enough for you to heat multiple pads at once. Okay, so we finished taking off all our big components like the volume wheel, the cartridge slot, headphone jack, DC jack. So now we're moving on to the hard part, all these surface mount components. Now, I'm going to do my best to get good shots of this, but I'm going to be honest, these are tiny components and I don't know how well the camera is going to focus on them. For removing and installing all these surface mount components, I'm using a higher quality no clean flux paste. It comes in a syringe. It's a little pricey, but worth it. Alright, now that we've salvaged all the parts we need off the old board, we've got to put them all on this new board. Now when I was taking them off, there was a lot of really small pieces and they're not really labeled. So I actually put them on a sheet of paper, wrote which component it was, and put a piece of tape to hold it down so they don't get lost. Alright, so we're going to start with the CPU. Let's get into it. As you can see, we've got some bridged pins. To clean these up, I just clean the tip off of my soldering iron, add some more flux to it, and just kind of swipe down and away from the chip, and you should be able to get rid of those bridges. Once all the bridges are gone, I like to go back and make sure all the pins are secured by just pushing on them lightly with a small tool. And this is what it should look like once you're done. Now it's time for the other sides. Alright, so our CPU is in, and this was by far the most difficult part of this modification. From lining it up with all the pads, to making sure that all the legs are actually connected to the pads with solder, it took by far the longest for any one component. I urge you, take your time with this part because it will get frustrating. I think from here, it should be smooth sailing, so let's get back into it. For the majority of the remaining components, I'm going to pre-tin the pads and use the hot air rework station to heat up the solder and place the component onto the melted solder, with the exception of a couple components. Because the pads for these components are so close together, you can accidentally bridge them while you're trying to pre-tin them. The method to get rid of that is the same as we were using on the CPU. Just add some flux, hit it with a clean soldering tip, and it should come right off. Well, as you can see from my wardrobe change, it's been a few days, but thankfully, we are done with the surface mount components. That took a lot longer than I thought. I was using this hot air station with this soldering iron that comes with it. Um, I would not recommend this as your first project. It was very difficult and it took a long time. But thankfully, now we can go back to the through hole components. We've got our volume wheel, our link port, the power regulator, headphone jack, the cartridge slot, and the speaker. And the speaker we're going to clean up a little bit because it's kind of dirty. Alright, so we're almost ready to put this thing together, but first we're going to do a little prep work on this charging board. We're going to take the USB-C port off to get more clearance for our battery. And then on the Game Boy Pocket Color, we need to solder our charging board to the battery terminals. And we also need to bridge pins 2 and 3 where the DC port goes so it'll turn on. Everybody. Unfortunately, when I removed this USB-C port off the charging board, I did not hit the record button. I hit it after I finished, thinking I was stopping the recording. So, I'll just tell you what I did. I added some flux to the pins, heated it up with the hot air rework station, and pulled it off. It was really that simple. There's not a whole lot of solder holding it on. Anyway, let's continue with the USB-C installation. Let's go trim the shell and put the port in. So we're going to stick this USB-C port right where the normal DC input goes on a Game Boy Pocket. Now we're going to make a slot for the IR sensor. Alright, we're going to be prepping the board for the screen install. We need to solder to P12 and P13 for the start and select to control the menus for the screen. Okay everybody, so I tried turning this on off camera for the first time and it did not turn on. I get a tiny pop from the speaker, but other than that I don't get anything. I believe the problem might be this guy right here, U9. So you see that little dot? That's an alignment dot. Normally you have to orient the board in a certain way. That's counting a pin. So this one has the text facing that this is up and this is down. This one, I couldn't see the text originally because I had flux on it. And this one I have it inverted. The text up is this way and the text down is this way. So I believe the first thing I'm going to try is flipping this one over and see if that fixes it. Alright, so I wanted to get a good shot of this so you guys could use that to help you. So these are the two components that I was talking about. You can see this one has a dot right here, and I lined that up with this dot. This one had flux on it, and I couldn't see these letters, but you can see there's also a dot in this corner for this component. So I had it originally oriented with these two upside down, and it wouldn't turn on. I just got a small pop from the speaker, and then nothing on the screen, no power LED. After cleaning it off and seeing the letters, I flipped it around. Now it turns on. Another component, just in case you guys run into this. So this EM10 right here. Now, it's on the bill of materials to get a new one, but it was out of stock and back ordered when I was getting one. So I salvaged this one, but the thing is that this has 3 pins on one side and 2 on the other. This is a choke. Normally they only have the 4 pins and it's a little block. I wasn't sure how to orient this one, and I just took my best guess, and as it turns out, this is the way to do it. Now, not all Game Boy Colors have this style choke with the exposed wire and the third leg. Some of them do have the brick, but in case you guys run into that, this is the correct orientation. Alright, let's go for attempt number 2. I'm testing this. There we have it. Turns on. Whew, that was a close one. I will not lie. But now I just got to button it back up. Okay, so I may have run into a new issue. So as you can see, it turns on, but I need to adjust it further down. The only problem is, this is the new kit from Funny Playing, where it illuminates the Game Boy Color logo on the laminated screens. Or you can do it for an unlaminated one. The only problem is, because it reserves that area for the logo, I can't adjust it down far enough. I can order a Q5 OSD kit off of AliExpress, or I can rob it out of this one. Now I might get away with just robbing the ribbon cable out of this one and installing it in here. As you can see with this one, I can adjust the screen all the way to the bottom, and I believe that is what I need to do. Let's get this ribbon cable out. To explain where we're going to connect these 3 wires, I've got an unpopulated board here. Now, the way the original mod for that OSD kit went is you would solder to these test points that are underneath the silicone pad. To make things a little bit easier, if we look up here, we can see we've got P10, P11, and P13. So P11, P10, and P13. So we'll be able to make the wires shorter, and we won't have to shove them underneath the silicone pad. So that's where we're going to solder it here. 10, 11, 13. And there you have it, the Game Boy Pocket Color. Now before we wrap up, let's talk about what we did to this Game Boy, its new features, and how to use them. So we've got our Game Boy Pocket Color. So the first thing you notice from the outside is this USB-C port and this lithium battery. So it's now rechargeable. And the next thing is that gorgeous IPS screen. Now this is a Q5 kit with the OSD. The way we go into it, because we soldered to the start button, is you press start and A and B. From here, you would press start and A to select your option. You can adjust down with A and B. To confirm an option, you would press start and A. You can actually, if you want it to go back to where it was set before, you can hit start and B. To scroll through the menu when the arrow is on the options, you use A and B. We've also got vertical position, so you can adjust it up and down to get that window perfectly centered. Horizontal for left and right. Then you've got pixel effect. Let's see if we can get that on camera. You can kind of see the pixel effect, and we'll switch it off. You can see it's solid. When we turn it on, you kind of get a grid simulating what an original Game Boy Color screen would look like. Now, this one also has a battery display, but I did not connect the battery terminal on the ribbon cable to the power supply, so it doesn't know anything. It just kind of defaults it on. The last option is the color adjust, and this is more for this kit. Also covers some DMG Game Boys, and you can customize the color palettes for that. Doesn't really affect this one. Now, we can also control it using two touch sensors, one in this corner and one in this corner. If we tap this one, it adjusts the brightness one step at a time. This one will switch the palette, which on a Game Boy Color isn't really helpful. But if you wanted to, you can put it on this one that kind of simulates playing on an original Game Boy. Switch that back, and there's our color palette. Now if you hold this, you can switch the pixel effect on and off. And that's all the features of our OSD display. The other thing is, because this is a color, we can play Game Boy Color games, enhanced Game Boy games that have color palettes but also work on an original Game Boy, and original Game Boy games. Now this mod wasn't all smooth sailing, but I think the end result was really worth it. I really like the way the Game Boy Pocket shell looks, and having it be a Game Boy Color on the inside is just super cool to me. I don't know if I would ever want to play Game Boy games on physical hardware any other way except maybe an analog pocket, but I'm never going to buy one of those. However, this was a very difficult mod. Now, I've been modding consoles for 3 or 4 years now, and this is the first time I did a large amount of surface mount components, and this is actually the first time I used this solder station. I would not recommend this as a first project. I wouldn't even recommend this as like a 5th project. This was a lot. There are over 110 components that you have to solder to that board. That's not counting taking them off of your donor. This is definitely something one could do at the home hobbyist level. It's by no means impossible, but you have to be prepared for the hiccups along the way, like screens that won't necessarily work or aren't compatible, installing components upside down. You need to be able to troubleshoot if you're going to attempt this, for sure. But I think it's definitely worth it. Having the ability to play all of my Game Boy library up to the Game Boy Color in one package that is in this form factor, I really like. So have I convinced you to try this for yourself? Maybe you've got a donor console that the button contacts are completely gone, or the battery contacts have gotten so much battery acid and all the traces are corroded away and none of it is any good. All you have to do is buy new components and salvage some of them, like the link port and the processor. But refurbishing with all new components makes this brand new. I mean, we basically built a Game Boy from scratch. And I just think that's the coolest thing. But let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of this mod? And if you liked this video, hit the like. If you didn't like it, hit the dislike. And until then, let's play some Game Boy.